Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today for this talk. My name is Jeannie Perales. I'm the Vice President for Museum Exhibitions, Learning, and Engagement here at Selby Gardens. And it's my pleasure to welcome our presenter, Dr. Mark Plotkin. There he is. Give a wave. He's there in the Chipuis of South America. Actually, he's in DC, fortunately, so he's hardwired. I think you all are in for a treat today. This is going to be a great talk and very informative. So first, I just want to introduce Mark and then give you a little context about this exhibition, or I'm sorry, this program and how it's related to a current exhibition that we have on display. So Dr. Mark Plotkin is an ethnobotanist and plant explorer specializing in medicinal plants of the tropical rainforest. He's going to share with us today the incomparable value of rainforest ecosystems and the plants and the people who call them home, and with whom he's worked for more than 40 years. Mark is a renowned scholar and even a TED Talks presenter, and we're just very lucky to have him here with us today. He's led and guided the Amazon conservation team since 1996, when he co-founded the organization with his fellow conservationist, Liliana Madrigal. He's a renowned ethnobotanist who's spent almost 3 decades studying traditional plant use with indigenous healers of tropical America. He's served as research associate at the Botanical Museum of Harvard University, director of plant conservation at the World Wildlife. I meant to have that picture on. Isn't that a great picture? Director of plant conservation at the World Wildlife Fund and vice president for Conservation International. He's received countless awards. Among them are the San Diego Zoo Gold Medal for Conservation, the Roy Chapman Andrews Distinguished Explorer Award, and with Liliana Madrigal, the Skoll Foundation's Award for Social Entrepreneurship. So welcome, Mark, and thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today. We really are excited.
Thank you, Jeannie. Great to be here. I spoke at Selby in person about 20 years ago, and I guess I didn't like it because you're the first one who invited me back.
I think we could never find you. You're always all over the place. So now you've sort of been grounded, haven't you?
That's off to you. And I also want to extend a special thanks to my friend Beverly LaRocque, who was responsible for connecting us and making sure this all happened. So thank you, Beverly, and thank you, Jeannie, and thank you, supporters of Selby. You know, I regard botanical gardens as more important than ever before. You need air to breathe, you need clean water to drink, you need medicines when you're sick, you need to thank a plant. And the place to learn about plants is a place like Selby Gardens. So my request for everybody sitting in today is that if you're not already a member of Selby, you become a member. And I'm not letting people off the hook who are already members, because I'm going to ask them to buy membership for their friends. So that is how we make these types of presentations possible. Now, I want to take a few minutes today to talk about the work that I do in the Amazon in my organization. I'm the head of the Amazon conservation team, and we have worked in partnership with 55 tribes to map, manage, and improve protection of over 80 million acres of ancestral forest. And even though we have 45 minutes, which in the age of Spotify and Stitcher seems like an eternity, there's no way I could cram in everything that we're doing to try and save these people, save these plants, save these forests, save these animals. So I want to give you a brief introduction. So if we could have the first slide, please.
Oh, actually, Mark, I'm going to go through a couple more slides myself before we move on. Okay. And actually, that's a nice segue to my next slide, which is about Mark's publications. So I recently purchased this book, his newest book, The Amazon, What Everyone Needs to Know. And I'm very fascinated by reading through it. I've just started, but I would recommend it already. At the top here is the Plants of the Gods podcast, which he's just also published, and it's on Spotify, which is available for a free download. And I've been listening to that. It's really cool. And if you ever wondered about, peyote and magic mushrooms and ayahuasca, this is a very interesting discussion about these very important plants. And finally, hit the website of the Amazon conservation team here. And at the end, if we have time, I'll show you a little clip. This particular video clip is called Why It Matters. And it's a beautiful summary in really about 2 minutes about why it is so important to conserve the rainforest. And finally, I wanted to plug his TED Talk. which is 20 minutes of brilliance and a really nice summary of the work that he's done in all these years. So just wanted to plug those things. And then I also wanted to talk about our own project with Indigenous peoples. So those of you who are our members, and this is a members program, so many of you know about this already, but for those who don't, we've been working with an Indigenous tribe in Costa Rica called BORUCA for the last 22 years. I'm sorry, the last 18 years. I don't know why I fast forwarded 4 more years, but they are one of 22 Indigenous tribes in Costa Rica. Perhaps that's where that number came from. And we have right now on display their beautiful rainforest masks of Costa Rica. They are hand carved and painted, and they are a celebration of life on the planet. And they're simply beautiful. We have them on display in our Museum of Botany and the Arts. And we do this each January. So I know some of you that are on this call are already part of the fan club of the BORUCANs. So this is where the village is situated. In the back, you can see the mountains here in the back. That's the Talamanca Mountains. And what you can't see is that to the west of BORUCA is the Osa Peninsula, which is where Corcovado National Park, which is a pretty famous park, is located. Some of you may have been there. But you can see it's rural and quite isolated. Very beautiful place. I had a chance to visit with the horticulture and botany team a year and a half ago. This is a map of Central America. You can see here where Costa Rica is located, just sandwiched right here between Panama and Nicaragua, and a map of Costa Rica. And again, you can see here the red dot indicating where BORUCA is located. So as I mentioned, we do have this beautiful display on right now until January 31st. And if you haven't come in to see it, we invite you to do so. But a little bit of the history of the masks. This village of BORUCA has been making these masks for 500 years. They started the tradition when the Spanish conquistadors came in. They knew that the Spaniards were Christians and that they were afraid of the devil. And so they are not devil worshippers, but they do make devil masks. They're called diablitos. This is a picture of a couple of our BORUCAN friends in their sacred ceremony, which happens each year at the end of December, and which was not able to happen this year, of course, because of COVID. But during this time, they celebrate the fact that the Spaniards couldn't conquer their culture and their spirit. And so they dance the masks and they have all kinds of wonderful rituals and ceremonies that we are not allowed to be at, which is completely fair. And then this is about the resurgence of mask making and its relation to Selby Gardens. And so I think I can safely say that this is the only place in the world where you can see all of these masks exhibited together in one place of museum quality. And they're really quite spectacular. So I invite you to come and see the exhibition and enjoy the celebration of Indigenous wisdom and culture. This is a picture from the opening of the exhibition last year. That is Marcos and Esteban, and they're wearing their ceremonial masks. And you can see our guest here is just delighted to be interacting with Esteban, and he is so proud of, and he should be extremely proud of his work and of his culture. And so we're really happy and very honored to be able to play even a small role in sharing their story and helping them economically and culturally. Again, there's Esteban and Marcos. And this is pictures of the masks installed in the museum. Again, that's from last year, but it looks quite similar this year. Really colorful, beautiful celebration of life. And these are some of the types of masks that you would see. On the left is the Diablo, which is more of the traditional, again, meant to scare the Spaniards and protect them. This is called a combinado, which has both a Diablito and the ecological elements. And then this is an ecological mask, which is simply kind of a celebration of the life in the rainforest. And I would be remiss if I didn't recognize our fair trade importers with whom we work on this project, Lucuma Designs, who are a Sarasota-based fair trade importer who works with Peru, but also with Costa Rica. So we're very lucky to have them and to be able to display these beautiful masks. And I think something that Mark is going to get into in his talk is about how Indigenous communities have been hard hit by COVID-19, and I want to say that BORUCA is no exception to that. So it is really nothing short of a miracle that we were able to pull off this exhibition this year. And we're really, really pleased that we were. Not only has COVID hit the village, it also has really impacted their ability to do business and their economy. So pretty much their income comes from the sale of the masks and other artisanal goods, but also from eco and cultural tourism. And they shut the village down, of course, back in March. And in fact, in Costa Rica, they shut down the whole postal service for 8 months. So we really didn't know if we were going to get masks. They really didn't know if we were going to buy them. So many of them went back to work harvesting agricultural crops, which of course is a lot less lucrative. So I can tell you our friends in BORUCA are thrilled that the exhibition is on and that we were able to import them this year and showcase them. So again, if you haven't made it and you're in town, please come and see us up through January 31st. They are also for sale, and a significant portion of the proceeds goes to the BORUCAN village and the people there. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mark, and thank you for joining us today. And I also should tell you that we'll have time, hopefully at the end, for some Q&A, and you could use the chat feature or the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll be happy to answer questions if we're able to. Okay, thank you. Mark, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Judy. I'm going to focus mostly on the Amazon today, since that's where I do most of my work, but I love Costa Rica so much. I'm married to a Costa Rican, so I know the country pretty well. This is what I want to talk about today, essentially the relationship between people and plants, focusing on the people who know the plants best, and those are the shamans. The fellow on the left of this picture that I'm talking to is one of the great shamans of the Warab people of the Xingu region of the Southeast Amazon of Brazil. And I'll be showing you some more pictures of that next. Much of the information I'm going to give you is drawn from my new book, The Amazon, What Everyone Needs to Know, recently published by Oxford University Press. And this is written for the interested and educated public. It's not a technical book, nor is it written for school children. It's full of stories, it's full of information, and there's so much information on the Amazon, so much information on the rainforest. It's really garbage. One of the reasons I wrote it was to show that the Amazon is not the lungs of the planet. That's plankton. If you want to talk in a metaphorical sense, you can call the Amazon the lungs of the planet. But these sort of eco-factoids, myths was one of the things that I wanted to address and correct. Next. So in the book, I identified these as the main threats to the Amazon landscape, and not the only ones, just the major ones. COVID-19, as I'll be talking about, cattle ranching, hydroelectric dam. Keep in mind that Brazil has more cows than there are Brazilians. They've gone into cattle ranching and meat production in a big way, with disastrous effects on the rainforest. All of these things are having deleterious effects on the rainforest, on the rivers, on the people that live there. And what I want to do today is talk a little bit about them and to focus on the solutions and potential solutions that organizations like the Amazon Conservation Team, my organization, academic organizations, institutions, gardens like Selby are helping to address. Next. So when I started working in rainforest conservation in the late 70s, Save the Rainforest, Save the Amazon was sort of a rallying cry for the entire environmental movement. But after about 10 years, it kind of dropped from the headlines, and we spent 20 years laboring away to protect the rainforest, but wondering how to get the rainforest back in the headlines. Well, in 2019, it happened, but not for any good reason. The incredible Amazon fires were on every television screen, every computer screen in the world, essentially. Next. And very briefly, this graphic talks about the disastrous effects. Over 74,000 fires found in the Brazilian Amazon. This is in 1 year. And underreported in the media was the fact that it spread into neighboring countries like Bolivia and Paraguay, which is not part of the Amazon, Bolivia is. So it's spreading into dry forests as well as rainforests into other countries. Next. Also underreported in the media was the fact that it had a disastrous impact on many indigenous communities. These people rely on the rainforest for survival, not just their food, but the housing materials, their fibers, Their hunting weapons are made from forest plants, forest trees, forest lianas. So the impacts of these fires wasn't just one of destruction of biodiversity. It had a serious impact on the indigenous and the peasant communities as well. Next. So what were temples of biodiversity, what were temples of biocultural diversity, were destroyed over large swaths of what had been forest. Next. Another underreported aspect, particularly in 2020, was the impact of the coronavirus. This is an editorial I did for the Los Angeles Review of Books. You can get the link from Jeannie if you want to read what I had to say. But in a nutshell, know that coronavirus has had a terrible impact on indigenous communities in the Americas. The Navajos were hit twice as hard as any community in this country. Same thing with the indigenous peoples. Next, in the Amazon. And here's the intriguing thing here. We are a little uncertain of how it got to human beings, but we know where it originated. It originated in bats. Now, tropical bats are covered in viruses. And the bat that gave rise to the coronavirus is in Southeast Asia in what are called wet markets, wildlife markets in China. However, bats are pantropical, obviously. And my colleague, Chris Walzer at the Bronx Zoo, the Wildlife Conservation Society, noted that bats in the Amazon have as many viruses as do bats in Southeast Asia or Africa, for that matter. The point being that there's two takeaways from the point I'm making here. One is that when we cut down the rainforest, when we snatch animals out of the rainforest, these viruses can jump to us. Also, that these viruses live on these bats, but these bats don't get infected by them. So if you want to control the virus, if you want to keep the next pandemic at bay, and believe me, there's lots more out there. First of all, stop cutting down the rainforest. And second of all, let's figure out how the bats are fending off these infections, which is killing thousands of Americans every day. Next. So as I said, COVID-19 in the Amazon is killing the indigenous peoples twice as fast as it's killing the peasant peoples, the white peoples, the Afro-Amazonians. And so this has to be considered a cultural catastrophe in addition to the biological catastrophe of rainforest destruction. Next. Here's an editorial I did for Mongabay. Now remember that name, Mongabay, MONGABAY.com. Again, I'll leave it with Jeannie if people want to write it down afterwards. This is the best rainforest information site. This is my go-to site because what you read there, you can trust. There's so much misinformation on the rainforest that in Mongabay is the place you need to start. And I did an editorial for them talking about the fact that it was killing these indigenous peoples and in particularly indigenous leaders. This is my beloved late friend, Santos Sauna of the Kogi peoples. I'll be talking about them not in the Amazon, they're on the coast of Colombia. This is actually taken in Costa Rica, this site on the shore of the Osa Peninsula, just south of BORUCA. We were there for a planning meeting. And when we do planning, we always bring our indigenous colleagues because we are a biocultural conservation organization. We don't think you can save the rainforest unless you save the indigenous peoples, or at least empower them to save themselves. And that's what we call biocultural conservation. Next. So these are the major needs in terms of helping these people help themselves. Sanitary and medical supplies, we're not talking about ventilators, we're talking about soap and face masks, emergency food aid, healthcare information in the tribal language, which the government typically doesn't supply. If it's in Brazil, it's in Portuguese. If it's in Peru, or Costa Rica for that matter, it's in Spanish. If it's in Suriname, it's in Dutch, which is the national language of Dutch Guiana. But what we've done is focus on getting them the information in their language. And I'm proud to point out that the Amazon Conservation Team has already delivered over 35 tons of these supplies to the indigenous peoples in the rainforest. So if you want to help the indigenous peoples, we are your best bet in terms of efficiency and effectiveness of getting the aid to the people that need it the most. Next. But I mean, that's an botanist. My focus is not on pandemics. I focus not on politics. What ethnobotanists do is we work with shamans to help them and their children and grandchildren document which medicinal plants they use and what the dosages are and how to administer them. Next. So here's an important and almost a trick question. I want you guys to think about what is the most valuable medicinal plant in the world in purely economic terms. What would you think? Some people say cannabis because it's in the billions now with this whole cannabis trade. Other people say opium because it's a source of many of the most important painkillers we still use, but that's not the correct answer. Next. This is the most important medicinal plant in the world, the wine grape. Wine is made from one species of grape. Next. Wine is medicine. It's a calmative. It's a soporific. That means it's a sleep inducer. It's an anesthetic. It's an antimicrobial, in other words, an antibiotic. People have long thought that the bacteria-killing properties of wine was because of the alcohol, but we now know that's not true. It's the polyphenol compounds, which are even more effective. This is essentially the first antibiotic. The first medical prescription known is from Iraq. It's about 8,000 years ago, and it is for a medicine made out of wine. So yes, wine is great for many purposes, but it has to be thought of as important as a medicinal plant as well. Next. When I mentioned this to my old friend Jane Goodall, who's one of our advisors on the board of the Amazon Conservation Team, she said, you know, most people, when they think about the origin of wine or medicinal wine, they think of the Greeks or the Romans, but it's not true. She says, animals drink wine. And I said, how is that possible? She says, my chimps like to get snockered on the fermented fruit of the marula tree. And it's not just chimps, it's birds, it's elephants. Animals discovered wine long before we did. Next. So this is the marula fruit. It's an anacardiaceae. There's examples of this family growing in Selby. I've seen them myself. This is the family of the mango. This is the family of poison ivy. And animals wait for these fruits to ferment, and then they eat them and they catch a buzz. Here's the proof. Next. Not the greatest video, but you get the idea. Next. So there's a whole family, a whole field of study, which I'm sure most of you haven't heard of, called zoopharmacognosy, which entails studying animals' use of medicinal plants. There's a chapter on this in my book, Medicine Quest. This is a whole field of study initiated by Jane Goodall and fertile field for investigation for students looking to get into the field of finding new medicines from nature. Next. So this is the rainforest, what Tom Lovejoy has called the greatest expression of life on Earth. Next. It's been studied by indigenous people since they first arrived over 10,000 years ago in the Amazon. And the point I want to make here is that we're still finding new things. We studied the Amazon for 250 years scientifically, from the Western scientific perspective, and we're still finding new aspects. This is a coral reef found at the mouth of the Amazon only about 4 or 5 years ago. Next. And I detail this in the new book, Next, these new finds. This is a cobalt blue tarantula. Now our estimates, we're finding a new species of animal or plant in the Amazon every 2 days. That's how much is still out there. And most of them are beetles, okay? Tiny beetles, but not all of them. This is a giant cobalt blue tarantula. And if you can still find new species this big and this gaudy, imagine what else is out there. Next. Here's another example, the electric eel. The electric eel was described by Linnaeus, the father of scientific classification, 250 years ago. In fact, Volta studied electric eels, and that led him to design the first man-made battery. Next. And yet just last year, we found 2 new species of electric eels. This gets to my point about not everything we find is a teeny tiny little bug. Electric eels are 8 feet long slabs of meat that shoot out electrical impulses. They've been called the Jedi of the rainforest. And we're still finding new species of those. Imagine what's still out there. And we're now studying these electric eels to figure out how to design longer lasting batteries, which can be implanted in the human body, like for pacemakers. So when we're talking about medicine and rainforest, we're not just talking about shamans and plants. There are many ways to learn from creatures around the world, but most creatures in the terrestrial environment are found in the rainforest or in the rainforest river. Next. Tallest tree in the rainforest. You guys have been to Costa Rica, right on the Osa Peninsula, just south of BORUCA. They found a kapok tree, which was declared the tallest tree in the New World rainforest. That means all of the Amazon, all of Central America, it was a kapok tree. In Central America, just south of BORUCA. But guess what? Just last year, we found a tree which is 100 feet taller. Denizia, it's a legume, plenty of legumes at Selby. Okay, to put this in perspective, world records are broken all the time, but typically it's by a millimeter. Typically it's by an inch. Typically it's by a second when they break a record at the Olympics. This is 100 feet taller than any tree known in the New World rainforest. So again, imagine what's out there waiting to be found. Next. And as I said, ethnobotanists work with shamans, medicine men, and to some extent medicine women, to document their knowledge of healing plants. This is my old friend and mentor, Amashina. I've been working with him since 1982. He co-led a tour to the Amazon with me, the one that Beverly was on. And I'm sure she's got great Amashina stories if you guys need more information or another perspective. Next. As I said, I've been working with these people a long time. This is the great trio shaman, Yalawifa. I've been working with him since 1982. Next. This is a local shaman named Kamanya. I've been working with him just as long. And let me show you the same guys in the same pose 30 years later. Next. So I showed this to a friend of mine and she said, well, I noticed that the notebook you're using is a lot bigger. Go back one, please. And I said, yeah, well, as the brain shrinks, you know, the notebook has to get bigger. Next. But these types of relationships that are so long-term, multi-decade, are really the way you build trust and gain the information, work with them in true partnership rather than just showing up and saying, look, I got to write a PhD thesis. Tell me what you know, and I'm out of here in 11 months. Next. And this is one of the most interesting finds in all of the rainforest. This is a green monkey frog found by my colleague, the late Lauren McIntyre, who went on to find the source lake of the Amazon. This is covered in an incredible book called Amazon Beaming, that he learned the lessons from this frog, and that's not a misstatement, that helped him find this lake. What he found was that these frogs are covered in hallucinogenic slime, and the Indians used this for the purpose of divination. Now, that might seem kind of odd, but these compounds in the frog skin are also antimicrobial. That is, they kill drug-resistant bacteria. And I think drug-resistant bacteria, in some ways, is certainly an equal to, and some might say a bigger threat to our species than COVID-19, because it's in every hospital in the industrialized world. And so these finds, nobody knew there were medicinal frogs in the Amazon 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and now we're finding not just this, but other frogs that have potentially medicinal compounds in them. Next. So this brings us to the exhibit at Selby of Rainforest Masks of Costa Rica. And I hope all of you will be able to visit the garden virtually or in person, and don't just look at these masks as art. There's messages embedded within. And when you see half shaman, half jaguar, or half shaman, half eagle, there's a message there. And that is that the shaman in these cultures typically is the man or the woman who is at the boundary line between what we consider reality and the spirit world. And they go back and forth, often using these hallucinogenic plants or hallucinogenic frogs or hallucinogenic fungi. And that's why they are able to divine the future in some cases. This is why they can cure things that our own physicians cannot in some cases. This is why they sometimes can diagnose stuff. I mean, they don't have a CAT scan. Or you could say, in a broad sense, that's what these hallucinogens are, that allow them to see things that our own physicians cannot. And make no mistake, I'm a scientist. I don't believe everything every shaman tells me. I don't believe that every shaman can cure everything, because they can't and they don't. But for almost 40 years, I've seen shamans curing cases, in some cases, of things that Western physicians could not. So the point here is not to replace Western medicine with shamanic medicine. The point here is to create a world where there's space for these other systems of medicine, so that we have the best of all these worlds. They have the best access to Western medicine, and we have the best access to shamanic medicine. That's the future of medicine if we get it right. Next. And Jeannie showed you that BORUCA is in southern Costa Rica. And here's something most of you don't know. Costa Rica is open for business. Costa Rica at this point is a much better run country than the US, is a much safer country than the US, I say from Washington, DC. And they're open for business. So if you have cabin fever, and who doesn't at this point, consider visiting Costa Rica. And I want to point out something else. If you look to the right of Costa Rica, there's Panama. And if you look to the right of Panama, there's Colombia. And, you know, the way I learned in school is that native peoples, that first peoples, that Amerindian peoples populated the Americas was they marched across the Bering Strait and marched down through North America, through Central America, through South America, you know, in a straight line. Well, human history isn't that simple. And we're finding plenty of evidence that it was much more complicated than that simplistic story. Next. There was a paper published this week in trying to suss out the origin of corn. These new technologies and genetic analysis are unraveling the global story. I mean, not just human origins, but plant origins, cultivated plant origins. And we found that corn, which we know is native to the area, basically on the border of Mexico and Guatemala, when Columbus got to the Americas, it was already widespread. It was already throughout North America. It was already throughout South America. So, you know, this primitive history that I was taught, that these people were sort of savages living in their huts, you know, never went anywhere, it's clearly untrue. Corn moved from Central America all the way far north into North America and far south into South America. And the reason that this is important is because when we took the Kogi peoples to Costa Rica for this meeting, they said our ancestors were here. Not just on the march south and southeast, but that in pre-Columbian times, they were visiting and trading with Costa Rica in a far more advanced and sophisticated fashion than Western history ever gave them credit for. Next. These are the Kogis, some of the most traditional people on the planet, still maintain traditional dress. They don't dress up like this for pictures or for tourists. This is who they are, and they're very proud of it. Next. Now, moving down to the Amazon, this is a picture that my mentor, Richard Schultes, had in his office. Over his left shoulder was the Yukuna peoples of Colombian Amazon snuffing during a ceremony, and over the right was Chiribiquete mountain range in the center of the Colombian Amazon. And if you want to know what Chiribiquete looks like today, look behind me. This is a picture I took just a few years back. Next. Schultes was best known as a pioneer in the study and documentation of hallucinogenic plants. This is him with a shaman in the Sibundoy Valley in Colombia, where he collected ayahuasca for the first time. But he was also the fellow who said, we can't just protect nature, we also need to protect culture. And this is where the origin of the concept of biocultural conservation comes out of. Next. Now, Schultes did seminal work amongst the Kiowa peoples in Oklahoma, where he studied peyote. He then went to southern Mexico to the state of Oaxaca and made the first scientific documentation of magic mushrooms, which are now coming to the fore, not only as the origin of the chemicals in beta blockers. I don't know how many people out there take beta blockers, but you should thank a magic mushroom. And then he went to the Colombian Amazon, where he did the first scientific documentation of yahe, or ayahuasca, the vine of the soul. Here's why that's important. The mainstreaming of these indigenous hallucinogens into Western medicine, which is happening ever more rapidly, is now offering great hope for so-called incurable diseases like PTSD and depression and schizophrenia. In some cases, not all cases, the patients are responding very favorably to these hallucinogenic principles. In the hands of the shamans, the medicine women and medicine men, these hallucinogens, these entheogens, are essentially biological scalpels that allows the shaman to analyze, diagnose, treat, and sometimes cure ailments that our own physicians cannot. Next. This is an ayahuasca shaman in the middle of a ceremony in the Colombian Amazon, and proof that ayahuasca has really caught on in popular culture. Next. Is that there are many podcasts, many articles, a big business now in terms of cannabis based on these mind-altering chemicals. And as Jeannie said, I have a new podcast series, Plants the Gods, focusing on my favorite hallucinogens. So it covers ayahuasca, it covers hallucinogenic snuffs of the Amazon, working on one on magic mushrooms, did one on opium. And if you're interested in some of these stories that I'm alluding to, like how the American Revolution was based on plants, and I'm not talking about tea, talking about timber for tall masts, check out this podcast. It's on many platforms. The easiest is Spotify. You don't need to sign up or pay any price. You just tune in and hit the button. Next. Here's proof that ayahuasca has conquered the world. This is the headline in The Onion. Ayahuasca shaman dreading yet another week of tech CEOs to spiritual oneness. So this obscure liana from the Northwest Amazon is not only for sale on the internet, it's being mocked in The Onion. Next. And as Jeannie said in the introduction, I'm the head of the Amazon conservation team known as ACT, amazonteam.org on the web. Next. This is the most important image I'm going to share with you today in terms of the importance of working with indigenous peoples. The top half of this picture is the Xingu, where that first picture she showed of me with the shaman lives. The bottom half is outside the Xingu. In other words, the top half is the forest where the Indians live. The bottom half is where the white man lives. Top, lots of trees, lots of plants, lots of animals, lots of biodiversity, lots of medicines. In the bottom, nothing. Next. One of the ways we've gone about saving the forest and empowering the people to do so is teaching them how to map their lands. Next. This is what we call ethnographic mapping. We have now done this with 55 tribes throughout the Amazon. Next. And what this is about is allowing them to take control of their forest, combining shamanic wisdom with 21st century technology. And remember, the Amazon is not just Amerindians, not just native peoples. You also have Afro-Brazilians, you also have Afro-Surinamers. So you see our cartographer on the left here, the guy in the white t-shirt, who's actually from the YY tribe, teaching the Trio tribe how to use a GPS. And on the right, he's working with Afro-Surinamers and teaching them how to make maps. Next. Another thing we've done to help these people generate income without destroying the forest, we work with one of the former members of the uncontacted tribe to figure out what the potential resources they could utilize without destroying the forest. Next. And these uncontacted tribes, we don't make contact. We think they should be left alone. We've identified 70 different tribes, primarily in the Northwest Amazon. And that's the focus of my TED Talk, which Jeannie can give you the address of. Next. The reason they're uncontacted is when the rubber boom hit. This is the head of the rubber boom in the early 1900s in the Peruvian Amazon. The Indians were chained, they were mutilated, they were starved to death if they didn't bring in enough rubber. So many tribes ran into the rainforest and they remain essentially in hiding ever since. Next. This is why you leave them alone. Next. This looks like people who didn't leave an uncontacted tribe alone. Actually, this is an art installation in Havana, Cuba, of an artist who said, this is why you should leave uncontacted tribes alone. Next. But how do you study uncontacted tribes if you don't want to make contact with them? And the answer is, we went back to the early explorers' accounts, who sometimes made contact or heard about them from neighboring tribes. Next. We work with the tribes around them. This is our secret sauce. By working with the tribes one over from the uncontacted tribes, we can find out about them without having to make the contact, which we don't want to do. Next. We've also erected guard houses at the mouths of rivers in which the uncontacted tribes are living at the headwaters, and you protect the mouth, nobody gets up the river. Next. And again, I don't want to make it seem like we know what's good for them. These are the wishes of the contacted peoples conveyed to them by the uncontacted peoples. And the idea is not to lock them in, that wouldn't be right, and we could do it anyhow. The idea is to keep the outside world at bay. We've also trained indigenous park rangers. We've been running this program in the Amazon for over a decade. So environmental organizations like to take nice pictures and say, look at this great program. But when you're doing something over a decade, that's proof of concept. Next. Another problem we face is illegal gold mining. The gold miners are coming, for example, across the border from Brazil to try and mine in indigenous lands, in or near the lands of indigenous peoples and particularly uncontacted tribes. So we've been monitoring them. We've had them thrown out time and time again. Next. This is my mentor Schultes in Chiribiquete. Chiribiquete is the mountain range you see sitting behind me. This was first explored scientifically by Schultes in the 40s and 50s. Next. That's essentially the same part of Chiribiquete, a picture I took a few years back. It has now been turned into the largest rainforest park in the world. It was initially set up by Schultes and his Colombian colleagues in the early 80s. The Amazon Conservation Team has partnered with the local tribes and with the Colombian government to expand it 3 times. The latest expansion was in December. So we're still at it. Next. Another view from the southeast, looking at these Lost World Mountains, most of which have never been climbed or botanized to this day. Next. And this is a graphic showing you a little bit of the expansion. The central part, Serranía de Chiribiquete, is the original park as laid out by Schultes and his colleagues. Next. And this is one of the expansions. This is to the south. This is not a national park. The yellow area is 2 indigenous reserves set up at the behest of our indigenous colleagues in partnership with ACT and the Colombian Park Service. So what you're looking at is a mosaic of national parks, indigenous reserves. It can't be one or the other. It needs to be all of them working in concert. Next. Further expansion to the northwest. Next. Like I said, we expanded it again to the southeast. That's so I don't have a map to show you. But this whole focus of having people take control of their cultural and environmental destiny is fundamental to the way we work and fundamental to protecting the rainforest and rainforest cultures. Next. These are the type of details you get on the map. So I want to wind up here by showing how this looks when you take the shamanic wisdom out of their head and putting it into the computer, putting it on paper, how much they know. Next. And I want to close on this slide here because this to me is the future, not only of the conservation of the rainforest, but conservation in general, which is bridge building. Conservationists haven't really been good at building bridges between different conservation organizations, between different indigenous groups, between national organizations like the military, the business community. On the left, you see the great trio shaman Natala, who is the protagonist of my kids' book. And on the right, you see my pal Johannes, who's a Maroon from Suriname. And as you saw in that mapping photo of the Wai Indian teaching the Maroon women how to do the mapping, it's building bridges. It's creating commonalities. And in this hyper-political age we're living in, remember this, that environmentalism in this country was created by the Republicans. Okay, it was Teddy Roosevelt. The second greatest environmental president we ever had was Richard Nixon. So I don't care if you're an evangelical or a fundamentalist or an atheist, you need clean air, clean water, and medicines when you get sick. So I like to think that the environment is a cause that many of us can agree on and is a way of building bridges in the Amazon, in North America, in ways that we can all benefit and which we all suffer if we don't work together, adding even more incentive for finding new ways for all of us to work together. Thank you very much. Okay, Jeannie, if you want to ask a few questions, if we have time, I'll be happy to try and answer a couple of questions.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Mark. Can everybody hear me okay? Mark, can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Yeah, so we do have a question that's just come in. Let's see, Dean Snow asked, can you tell us anything about the distribution of Manchineel, Hippomane manchinella, called the Manzanilla de la Muerte in Spanish? It's relevant to a book I'm writing at the moment, Dean Snow.
I'm sorry, you cut out. What was the question?
Asking about Manchineel, Manzanilla de la Muerte.
I don't know that plant.
Okay.
If you have a scientific name, perhaps.
Hippomane or Hippomane manchinella.
Spell the genus.
Hippomane.
I don't know it.
Okay, that answers that question. So folks, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A or the chat. Let's see, we have one here from Carol Ann. Are the countries around Costa Rica working on saving the Amazon?
Well, yeah, Americans tend to associate the Amazon with Brazil as well. They should 60, probably 63, 66% is within the borders of Brazil. But you need to keep in mind that the Amazon reaches its leafy tendrils into 9 different countries. So Brazil is just one. There's 8 countries that have Amazon forest. And frankly, the biodiversity is much higher in the Andean countries like Peru and Ecuador in a, an area basis. So that as terrible as things are in Brazil, it doesn't mean the Amazon's lost. And that sometimes it's better to focus on the other regions. One of the reasons we focus on Colombia, because Colombia traditionally has been a lot easier for us to work in than Brazil, which is a lecture in and of itself. So as the world reopens, once we get past this terrible pandemic, I always advise people to go to Colombia because you have higher biodiversity, you have more cultural diversity in a small area. That's assuming that, Colombia becomes safe to visit once again. But the point here being is don't think that Brazil is the only place to go to see the Amazon any more than Costa Rica is the only place to go to see Central American rainforest. There are places in Mexico and Panama as well.
Great, thank you, Mark. Sally Chambers, who's one of my colleagues here at Selby, one of our botanists, she said, research botanist at Selby Gardens, specializing in ferns. When I was in Peru, I learned of indigenous peoples using some tree ferns as a sort of birth control. Do you know of any other medicinal uses of ferns? Really enjoyed your talk. Thanks so much.
Thank you. There is a book published in Colombia in Spanish on medicinal ferns, which is little known to the outside world, but that's where I would start. I had a foot problem. I injured my foot playing racquetball or climbing, and I don't remember, it was a number of years ago. And I was visiting a village I knew well. And the shaman said to me, you're limping. Now, this is Amashina. I showed him. He's Beverly's friend, too. She took some great pictures when we were there together. And he says, you're limping. What's up? And I said, I hurt my foot, you know. And I'd been to the doctor. I did the heat treatment. I did the cold treatment. I had steroid injections. Didn't help. So the shaman smiled and looked at me and said, give me your machete, which I did. And he walked, and I measured this. He walked 3 meters to a palm tree and carved off a fern. And we took the fern, threw it in the fire, applied it to my foot, burned the hell out of me, threw it in a pot of water and had me drink it. Now my foot stopped hurting. And 7 months later, it came back. And I went back to visit the shaman. He treated me again exactly the same way, same fern. And that was about 8 years ago. So yeah, there are medicinal ferns out there. But here's what's particularly cool. As your colleague there knows, there's not much information on medicinal ferns. People regard ferns as chemically inert. But you know what? I think that's more of our ignorance than the fern's failure to produce interesting chemicals. So yes, it is true that ferns are not hotbeds of alkaloids, which are the basis of many medicines, certainly the basis of most of the hallucinogens I'm talking about in the new podcast. But I am convinced, based on personal experience, that there's stuff out there in the ferns that we've been overlooking. Same thing with orchids, for that matter.
Sounds like a new project for you, Sally Chambers. I think that would be a great project at Selby Gardens. We got another question from Carol Ann Garafola, which is pretty broad. I'm not sure we have time to answer this in the right detail, but she's asking, in terms of using plants for medicinal purposes, how does each country support this?
Say that again, you cut out a bit.
Okay, in terms of using plants for medicinal purposes, how does each country support this?
How does each country support it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's a difficult question, as you pointed out, Jeannie. I think that we see much less use of traditional medicines in the Americas as a whole than you do in places like Africa and India and China. Remember that, you know, China is run by the Chinese, India is run by the Indians, and they have a respect for their traditions.
Mm-hmm.
Americas, by and large, is not run by the original inhabitants, which of course the Amerindians. And that's led to a denigration of the value of these things. But now, you know, physicians at Harvard and Yale discovering these shamanic medicines not only work, they're miraculous cures for so-called incurable things. So what we're in the midst of is what people are calling the psychedelic renaissance. There is lots of information of this on the web, but it's not and shouldn't be all about hallucinogens, which are a small part of the shaman's medicine chest. So I think we're rediscovering the value of these things. I mean, you just go in any grocery store, health food store, and you see the shelves and shelves and shelves of medicinal plants and nutraceuticals. So it's growing all the time.
Thank you. Judith Andrews has asked, how does the coral survive since so much fresh water is discharged into the Atlantic?
You know, we're still figuring that out, because if you look at the way coral reefs exist, they tend to exist in sunny waters. You know, you go to the Florida Keys, you can see the coral reef from the boat. And this is at the mouth of the Amazon, which is very muddy, which is why we didn't find it for 250 years. And it's just one more example of nature doing something cool and different. And who knows what we could learn from by studying that. It was a complete surprise to people. There was a coral reef there. So this is just one of nature's mysteries that we still need to unravel. And let me finish up here with a story that shows something similar. Scientists collected a plant growing in the hot springs or near the hot springs at Yellowstone. They wanted to find how this thing survived as a thermophile, that is, a plant that could survive this very, very hot soil. And so they took it back to the lab and they were able to grow it, but it wasn't heat resistant. So they thought, well, that's weird. So they went back to Yellowstone, they studied it in situ, right on the edge of the hot springs, and they found out that it had a bacteria in it. And they said, okay, that's the secret. We got to get the bacteria. So they took it back to the lab, they grew the plant, they put the bacteria in it, and it wouldn't grow in hot soil. So they went back to Yellowstone and looked at it again and found out that this thermophilic plant surviving in hot soil had inside it a bacteria. But when they looked at the bacteria, that had a virus inside of it. So this is like these Russian dolls. And much of studying nature involves the fact that you open a box and there's another mystery inside, and you open a box and there's another mystery inside. And when you open the teeniest, tiniest box, there's another box inside. So this is why, to me, Mother Nature is an endless source of mystery and wonder and intrigue. And this is why, to me, places like Selby Gardens deserve our support, because this is how you can visit the rainforest without leaving home. This is where you can get a taste of nature, which you just can't do with the plants on your windowsill. So in an ever urbanizing society, it becomes all the more important to support gardens, zoos, and other natural history institutions like museums, because this is part of nature which we need for the well-being of our heart, our mind, and our soul. Thank you.
Beautifully said. Thank you. Two things I wanted to mention to Dean Snow, who asked us the question about Manchineel, that Bruce Holst, our VP for Botany, and he says, hi, Mark. He responded to that. He said it's broadly distributed in South Florida and the Caribbean, Euphorbiaceae, and has extreme dermal toxicity. Okay. And then one other question here, Sally, again, one of our research botanists asked, in addition to your books and podcast, is there a recommendation for a general resource of listings of plants for medicinal purposes, like a general database?
The best magazine for medicinal plants is Herbalgram, Herbalgram. And just like much of the information on rainforests on the web is garbage, much of the information on medicinal herbs on the web is garbage. Herbalgram is the starting place. I subscribe. Because what you read there is based on scientific information. They always cite the scientific studies which you can go to, but if they say a plant's good for sleep, it's been proven in the laboratory. They didn't steal it off somebody else's website who stole it off somebody else's website. That's really the go-to place to start for reliable information on medicinal plants.
Great, thank you. If you have any additional questions or comments, folks, go ahead and put them in the chat or the Q&A. In the meantime, I'm going to show you this little 2-minute video that I mentioned in the beginning, which is Mark talking about why it matters.
I have had people say to me several times recently, well, the Amazon, that's so 1980s. When I got into this business in the 70s, people would say, well, who cares about the Amazon? We have to worry about population growth. So now when people say to me, who cares about the Amazon? We have to worry about global warming, climate change. Well, guess what? It's all the same thing. Overpopulation drives environmental destruction, which drives climate change. The first essentially global report of climate change was 25 years ago. The Kogi Indians of the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta in northern Colombia said, hey, what are you knuckleheads doing down there? Our glaciers are melting. And everybody thought, ha ha ha, isn't that cute? Look at those funny little white hats. But that was a report that the climate was changing. We didn't listen, and we failed to listen at our peril. People need to be interested, because look, whether you're interested in changing climate, whether you're interested in too many poor people, or whether you're interested in drug-resistant bacteria, which is a much greater threat to our species than climate change, deforestation, terrorism, nuclear weapons, you have an interest in the greatest expression of life on Earth, which is the rainforest, which is home to most of the world's terrestrial biodiversity. And if you look at the record, 80% of our antibiotics come from nature. And as a student of history, I know that history often predicts the future. So where are the best antibiotics waiting for us? In the rainforest of today.
Fantastic. Great message. As a kid, my favorite question was why. So I love a little clip that answers that question. So thank you so much, Mark. Very well articulated. I want to mention here at Selby Gardens that, we've been working for decades to document plant diversity of the Amazon and the Andes, discovering and or describing more than 2,000 species for science, and we'll continue to do so once we're able to travel again. And Mark, of course, is an ethnobotanist, so his work started with plants as well. And I love how he illustrates that it really expands out to the people and the larger ecosystems. We often say here, all life depends on plants, and you can't save that which you don't know exists. So keep up the great work, Mark, and we're so grateful that you were able to join us today, and I hope we can do it again. And I'm sure that there's just an endless supply of topics we could come up with together. Any other thoughts, Mark, that you want to share with our audience?
Well, again, it's important to understand the connections between botanical gardens, medicines, beauty. Shamans say when you watch a forest being destroyed, whether it's in person or on TV, a little bit of your soul dies, that it's all connected. So by having that green space in the middle of Sarasota, by having green space in the middle of DC with the National Arboretum, all botanical gardens need to be thought of as the living part of our urban environment, and they deserve our support.
Thanks for that plug, Mark, and I think you deserve our support too. So I'm very grateful. I hope everyone will check out Mark's resources and consider supporting the Amazon Conservation Team as well. I have one more question here. In terms of using plants for medicinal purposes, oh, no, we already answered that one. Sorry. I think we're good. Covered a lot of information, 40 years of research in 45 minutes. That's awfully impressive. So thank you so much again. And I want to mention this program has been recorded, and we will send that recording out to everyone who RSVP'd, and feel free to share that with your friends and family and spread the word. So thank you all, and stay well and be well. Thank you.